Chapter 1 of The Prodigal Village, A Christmas Tale. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. The Prodigal Village, A Christmas Tale by Irving Bacheller. Chapter 1, which introduces the Shepherd of the Birds. The day that Henry Smix met and embraced gasoline power and went up Main Street hand in hand with it is not yet forgotten. It was a hasty marriage, so to speak, and the results of it were truly deplorable. Their little journey produced an effect on the nerves and the remote future history of Bingville. They rushed at a group of citizens who were watching them, scattering it hither and thither, broke down a section of Mrs. Risley's picket fence, and ran over a small boy. At the end of their brief mésalliance, gasoline power seemed to express its opinion of Mr. Smix by hurling him against a telegraph pole and running wild in the park until it cooled its passion in the fountain pool. In the language of Hiram Blenkinsop, the place was badly smixed up. Yet Mr. Smix was the object of unmerited criticism. He was like many other men in that quiet village, slow, deliberate, harmless, and good-natured. The action of his intellect was not at all like that of a gasoline engine. Between the swiftness of the one and the slowness of the other there was a wide zone full of possibilities. The engine had accomplished many things, while Mr. Smix's intellect was getting ready to begin to act. In speaking of this adventure, Hiram Blenkinsop made a wise remark. "My married life learnt me one thing," said he. "If you're thinking of hitching up a wild horse with a tame one, be careful that the tame one is the stoutest, or it will do him no good." The event had its tragic side, and whatever Hiram Blenkinsop and other citizens of questionable taste may have said of it, the historian has no intention of treating it lightly. Mr. Smix and his neighbor's fence could be repaired, but not the small boy. Robert Emmet Moran, 6 years old, the son of the widow Moran, who took in washing. He was in the nature of a sacrifice to the new god. He became a beloved cripple, known as the Shepherd of the Birds, and altogether the most cheerful person in the village. His world was a little room on the second floor of his mother's cottage, overlooking the big flower garden of Judge Crooker, his father having been the gardener and coachman of the Judge. There were in his room an old pine bureau, a 4-post bedstead, an armchair by the window, a small round nickel clock that sat on the bureau, a rubber tree, and a very talkative little old tin soldier of the name of Bloggs, who stood erect on a shelf with a gun in his hand and was always looking out of the window. The day of the tin soldier's arrival the boy had named him Mr. Bloggs, and discovered his unusual qualities of mind and heart. He was a wise old soldier, it would seem, for he had some sort of answer for each of the many questions of Bob Moran. Indeed, as Bob knew, he had seen and suffered much, having traveled to Europe and back with the Judge's family, and been sunk for a year in a frog pond, and been dropped in a jug of molasses, but through it all had kept his look of inextinguishable courage. The lonely lad talked now and then with the round nickel clock, or the rubber tree, or the pine bureau, but mostly gave his confidence to the wise and genial Mr. Bloggs. When the spring arrived, the garden, with its birds and flowers, became a source of joy and companionship for the little lad. Sitting by the open window, he used to talk to Pat Crowley, who was getting the ground ready for sowing. Later, the slow procession of the flowers passed under the boy's window and greeted him with its fragrance and color. But his most intimate friends were the birds. Robins in the elm tree just beyond the window woke him every summer morning. When he made his way to the casement, with the aid of 2 ropes which spanned his room, they came to him, lighting on his wrists and hands, and clamoring for the seeds and crumbs which he was wont to feed them. Indeed, little Bob Moran soon learned the pretty lingo of every feathered tribe that camped in the garden. He could sound the panpipe of the robin, the fairy flute of the oriole, the noisy guitar of the bobolink, and the little piccolo of the song sparrow. Many of these dear friends of his came into the room and explored the rubber tree and sang in its branches. A colony of barn swallows lived under the eaves of the old weathered shed on the far side of the garden. There were many windows, each with a saucy head looking out of it. Suddenly half a dozen of these merry people would rush into the air and fill it with their frolic. They were like a lot of laughing schoolboys skating over invisible hills and hollows. With a pair of field glasses which Mrs. Crooker had loaned to him, Bob Moran had learned the nest habits of the whole summer colony in that wonderful garden. All day he sat by the open window with his work, an air gun at his side. The robins would shout a warning to Bob when a cat strolled into that little paradise. Then he would drop his brushes, seize his gun, and presently its missile would go whizzing through the air, straight against the side of the cat, who, feeling the sting of it, would bound through the flower beds and leap over the fence to avoid further punishment. Bob had also made an electric searchlight out of his father's old hunting jack, and when those red-breasted policemen sounded their alarm at night, he was out of bed in a jiffy and sweeping the tree-tops with a broom of light, the jack on his forehead. If he discovered a pair of eyes, the stinging missiles flew toward them in the light stream until the intruder was dislodged. Indeed, he was like a shepherd of old, keeping the wolves from his flock. It was the parish priest who first called him the shepherd of the birds. Just opposite his window was the stub of an old pine, partly covered with Virginia creeper. Near the top of it was a round hole, and beyond it a small cavern which held the nest of a pair of flickers. Sometimes the female sat with her gray head protruding from this tiny oriel window of hers, looking across at Bob. Pat Crowley was in the habit of calling this garden Moran City, wherein the stub was known as Woodpecker Tower, and the flower-bordered path as Fifth Avenue, while the widow's cottage was always referred to as City Hall, and the weathered shed as the tenement district. What a theater of unpremeditated art was this beautiful big garden of the Judge! There were those who felt sorry for Bob Moran, but his life was fuller and happier than theirs. It is doubtful if any of the world's travelers saw more of its beauty than he. He had sugared the window sills so that he always had company, bees and wasps and butterflies. The latter had interested him since the Judge had called them stray thoughts of God. Their white, yellow, and blue wings were always flashing in the warm sunlight spaces of the garden. He loved the chorus of an August night, and often sat by his window listening to the songs of the tree crickets and katydids and seeing the innumerable firefly lanterns flashing among the flowers. His work was painting scenes in the garden, especially bird tricks and attitudes. For this he was indebted to Susan Baker, who had given him paints and brushes and taught him how to use them, and to an unusual aptitude for drawing. One day Mrs. Baker brought her daughter Pauline with her, a pretty blue-eyed girl with curly blonde hair, 4 years older than Bob, who was 13 when his painting began. The shepherd looked at her with an exclamation of delight. Until then he had never seen a beautiful young maiden. Homely, ill-clad daughters of the working folk had come to his room, with field flowers now and then, but no one like Pauline. He felt her hair and looked wistfully into her face, and said that she was like pink and white and yellow roses. She was a discovery, a new kind of human being. Often he thought of her as he sat looking out of the window, and often he dreamed of her at night. The little shepherd of the birds was not quite a boy. He was a spirit untouched by any evil thought, unbroken to lures and thorny ways. He still had the heart of childhood, and saw only the beauty of the world. He was like the flowers and birds of the garden, strangely fair and winsome, with silken dark hair curling about his brows. He had large, clear brown eyes, a mouth delicate as a girl's, and teeth very white and shapely. The bakers had lifted the boundaries of his life and extended his vision. He found a new joy in studying flower forms and in imitating their colors on canvas. Now, indeed, there was not a happier lad in the village than this young prisoner in one of the 2 upper bedrooms in the small cottage of the Widow Moran. True, he had moments of longing for his lost freedom when he heard the shouts of the boys in the street and their feet hurrying by on the sidewalk. The steadfast and courageous Mr. Bloggs had said, "I guess we have just as much fun as they do, after all. Look at them roses." One evening, as his mother sat reading an old love tale to the boy, he stopped her. "Mother," he said, "I love Pauline. Do you think it would be all right for me to tell her?" "Never a word," said the good woman. "You see, it's this way, my little son. You're like a priest, and it's not the right thing for a priest." "I don't want to be a priest," said he impatiently. "Tut, tut, my laddie boy. It's for God to say, and for us to obey," she answered. When the widow had gone to her room for the night, and Bob was thinking it over, Mr. Bloggs remarked that in his opinion they should keep up their courage, for it was a very grand thing to be a priest after all. Winters he spent deep in books out of Judge Crooker's library, and tending his potted plants and painting them, and the thick blanket of snow in the garden. Among the happiest moments of his life were those that followed his mother's return from the post office with the Bingville Sentinel. Then, as the widow was wont to say, he was like a dog with a bone. To him, Bingville was like Rome in the ancient world, or London in the British Empire. All roads led to Bingville. The Sentinel was in the nature of a habit. One issue was like unto another, as like as 2 chaws of the same plug of tobaccer, a citizen had once said. Its editor performed his jokes with a wink and a nudge, as if he were saying, "I will now touch the light guitar." Anything important in the Sentinel would have been as misplaced as a cannon in a meeting house. Every week it caught the toy balloons of gossip, the thistledown events which were floating in the still air of Bingville. The Sentinel was a dissipation as enjoyable and as inexplicable as tea. It contained portraits of leading citizens, accounts of sundry goings and comings, and teas and parties and student frolics. To the little shepherd, Bingville was the capital of the world, and Mr. J. Patterson Bing, the first citizen of Bingville, who employed 1,100 men and had 4 automobiles, was a gigantic figure whose shadow stretched across the earth. There were 2 people much in his thoughts and dreams and conversation, Pauline Baker and J. Patterson Bing. Often there were articles in the Sentinel regarding the great enterprises of Mr. Bing and the social successes of the Bing family in the metropolis. These he read with hungry interest. His favorite heroes were George Washington, St. Francis, and J. Patterson Bing. As between the 3, he would secretly have voted for Mr. Bing. Indeed, he and his friends and intimates, Mr. Bloggs and the rubber tree and the little pine bureau and the round nickel clock, had all voted for Mr. Bing, but he had never seen the great man. Mr. Bing sent Mrs. Moran a check every Christmas, and now and then some little gift to Bob, but his charities were strictly impersonal. He used to say that while he was glad to help the poor and the sick, he hadn't time to call on them. Once Mrs. Bing promised the widow that she and her husband would go to see Bob on Christmas Day. The little shepherd asked his mother to hang his best pictures on the walls and to decorate them with sprigs of cedar. He put on his starched shirt and collar and silk tie and a new black coat which his mother had given him. The Christmas bells never rang so merrily. The great white bird in the Congregational church tower, that being Bob's thought of it, flew out across the valley with its tidings of goodwill. To the little shepherd it seemed to say, "Bing, bing, 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 coming, coming, coming." Many of the friends of his mother, mostly poor folk of the parish who worked in the mill, came with simple gifts and happy greetings. There were those among them who thought it a blessing to look upon the sweet face of Bob, and to hear his merry laughter over some playful bit of gossip, and Judge Crooker said that they were quite right about it. Mr. and Mrs. J. Patterson Bing were never to feel this blessing. The Shepherd of the Birds waited in vain for them that Christmas Day. Mrs. Bing sent a letter of kindly greeting and a $20 gold piece, and explained that her husband was not feeling quite up to the mark, which was true. "I'm not going," he said decisively, when Mrs. Bing brought the matter up as he was smoking in the library an hour or so after dinner. "No cripples and misery in mine at present, thank you. I wouldn't get over it for a week. Just send them our best wishes and a $20 gold piece." There were tears in the Shepherd's eyes when his mother helped him into his night clothes that evening. "I hate that $20 gold piece!" he exclaimed. "Laddie boy, why should ye be saying that?" The shiny piece of metal was lying on the window sill. She took it in her hand. "It's as cold as a snowbank!" she exclaimed. "I don't want to touch it. I'm shivering now," said the Shepherd. "Put it away in the drawer. It makes me sick. It cheated me out of seeing Mr. Bing." End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of The Prodigal Village, A Christmas Tale, by Irving Bacheller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2, The Founding of the Philistines. One little word largely accounted for the success of J. Patterson Bing. It was the word "No." It saved him in moments which would have been full of peril for other men. He had never made a bad investment because he knew how and when to say no. It fell from his lips so sharply and decisively that he lost little time in the consideration of doubtful enterprises. Sometimes it fell heavily and left a wound for which Mr. Bing thought himself in no way responsible. There was really a lot of goodwill in him. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. "Time is a thing of great value, and what's the use of wasting it in idle palaver?" he used to say. One day Hiram Blenkinsop, who had just recovered from a spree, met Mr. Bing at the corner of Main and School Streets and asked him for the loan of $1. "No, sir," said Mr. J. Patterson Bing, and the words sounded like 2 whacks of a hammer on a nail. "No, sir," he repeated, the second whack being now the more emphatic. "I don't lend money to people who make a bad use of it." "Can you give me work?" asked the unfortunate drunkard. "No, but if you were a hired girl, I'd consider the matter." Some people who overheard the words laughed loudly. Poor Blenkinsop made no reply, but he considered the words an insult to his manhood, in spite of the fact that he hadn't any manhood to speak of. At least, there was not enough of it to stand up and be insulted, that is sure. After that he was always racking his brain for something mean to say about J. Patterson Bing. Bing was a cold-blooded fish. Bing was a scrimper and a grinder. If the truth were known about Bing, he wouldn't be holding his head so high. Judas Iscariot and J. Patterson Bing were of the same bush. These were some of the things that Blenkinsop scattered abroad, and they were, to say the least of them, extremely unjust. Mr. Bing's innocent remark, touching Mr. Blenkinsop's misfortune in not being a hired girl, arose naturally out of social conditions in the village. Furthermore, it is quite likely that everyone in Bingville, including those impersonal creatures known as law and order, would have been much happier if some magician could have turned Mr. Blenkinsop into a hired girl and have made him a life member of the dishwater aristocracy, as Judge Crooker was wont to call it. The community of Bingville was noted for its simplicity and good sense. Servants were unknown in this village of 3,000 people. It had lawyers and doctors and professors and merchants, some of whom were deservedly well known, and J. Patterson Bing, the owner of the pulp mill, celebrated for his riches. But one could almost say that its most sought for and popular folk were its hired girls. They were few and sniffy. They exercised care and discretion in the choice of their employers. They regulated the diet of the said employers, and the frequency and quality of their entertainments. If it could be said that there was an aristocracy in the place, they were it. First among the who's who of Bingville were the Gilligan sisters, who worked in the brick house of Judge Crooker. Another was Mrs. Pat Collins, 72 years of age, who presided in the kitchen of the Reverend Otis Singleton. The two others were Susan Crowder, a woman of 60, and a red-headed girl with one eye, of the name of Featherstraw, both of whom served the opulent Bings. Some of these hired girls ate with the family, save on special occasions when city folk were present. Mrs. Collins and the Gilligans seemed to enjoy this privilege, but Susan Crowder, having had an ancestor who had fought in the Revolutionary War, couldn't stand it, and Martha Featherstraw preferred to eat in the kitchen. Indeed, there was some warrant for this remarkable situation. The Gilligan sisters had a brother who was a magistrate in a large city, and Mrs. Collins had a son who was a successful and popular butcher in the growing city of Hazelmead. That part of the village known as Irishtown, and a settlement of Poles and Italians, furnished the man-help in the mill, and its sons were also seen more or less in the fields and gardens. Ambition and education had been working in the minds of the young in and about Bingville for 2 generations. The sons and daughters of farmers and ditch-diggers had read Virgil and Horace and plodded into the mysteries of higher mathematics. The best of them had gone into learned professions. Others had enlisted in the business of great cities. Still others had gone in for teaching or stenography. Their success had wrought a curious devastation in the village and countryside. The young moved out, heading for the paths of glory. Many a sturdy, stupid person who might have made an excellent plumber, or carpenter, or farmer, or cook, armed with a university degree and a sense of superiority, had gone forth in quest of fame and fortune, prepared for nothing in particular, and achieving firm possession of it. Somehow the elective system had enabled them to get by in a state of mind that resembled the Mojave Desert. If they did not care for Latin or mathematics, they could take a course in Hierology, or in the taming of the wild chickadee, or in some such easy skating. Bingville was like many places. The young had fled from the irksome tasks which had roughened the hands and bent the backs of their parents. That, briefly, accounts for the fewness and the sniffiness above referred to. Early in, the village was shaken by alarming and astonishing news. True, the sinking of the Lusitania, and our own enlistment in the World War, and the German successes on the Russian frontier had in a way prepared the heart and intellect of Bingville for shocking events. Still, these disasters had been remote. The fact that the Gilligan sisters had left the Crookers and accepted an offer of $150 a month from the wealthy Nixons of Hazelmead was an event close to the footlights, so to speak. It caused the news of battles to take its rightful place in the distant background. Men talked of this event in stores and on street corners. It was the subject of conversation in sewing circles and the Philomathian Literary Club. That day the Bings whispered about it at the dinner table between courses, until Susan Crowder sent in a summons by Martha Featherstraw with the apple pie. She would be glad to see Mrs. J. Patterson Bing in the kitchen immediately after dinner. There was a moment of silence, in the midst of which Mr. Bing winked knowingly at his wife, who turned pale as she put down her pie fork with a look of determination, and rose and went into the kitchen. Mrs. Crowder regretted that she and Martha would have to look for another family unless their wages were raised from $100 to $150 a month. "But, Susan, we all made an agreement for a year," said Mrs. Bing. Mrs. Crowder was sorry, but she and Martha could not make out on the wages they were getting. Everything cost so much. If Mary Gilligan, who couldn't cook, was worth $100 a month, Mrs. Crowder considered herself cheap at twice that figure. Mrs. Bing, in her anger, was inclined to revolt, but Mr. Bing settled the matter by submitting to the tyranny of Susan. With Phyllis and 3 of her young friends coming from school and a party in prospect, there was nothing else to do. Maggie Collins, who was too old and too firmly rooted in the village to leave it, was satisfied with a raise of $10 a month. Even then she received a third of the minister's salary. His wife being a swell lady who had no time for work, sure the boy was no sooner married than he yelled for help, as Maggie was wont to say. All this had a decided effect on the economic life of the village. Indeed, Hiram Blenkinsop, the village drunkard, who attended to the lawns and gardens for a number of people, demanded an increase of $1 a day in his wages on account of the high cost of living, although one would say that its effect upon him could not have been serious. For years the historic figure of Blenkinsop had been the destination and repository of the cast-off clothing and the worn and shapeless shoes of the leading citizens. For a decade the venerable derby hat which once belonged to Judge Crooker had survived all the incidents of his adventurous career. He was, indeed, as replete with suggestive memories as the graveyard to which he was wont to repair for rest and recuperation in summer weather. There, in the shade of a locust tree hard by the wall, he was often discovered with his faithful dog Christmas, a yellow mongrel, good-natured cur, lying beside him, and the historic derby hat in his hand. He had a persevering pride in that hat. Mr. Blenkinsop showed a surprising and commendable industry under the stimulation of increased pay. He worked hard for a month, then celebrated his prosperity with a night of such noisy, riotous joy that he landed in the lock-up with a black eye and a broken nose and an empty pocket. As usual, the dog Christmas went with him. When there was a loud yell in the streets at night, Judge Crooker used to say, "It's Hiram again. The poor fellow is out a-Hiraming." William Snodgrass, the carpenter, gave much thought and reflection to the good fortune of the Gilligan girls. If a hired girl could earn $25 a week and her board, a skilled mechanic, who had to board himself, ought to earn at least $50. So he put up his prices. Israel Sneed, the plumber, raised his scale to correspond with that of the carpenter. The prices of the butcher and grocer kept pace with the rise of wages. A period of unexampled prosperity set in. Some time before, the old spirit of Bingville had received a notice that its services would no longer be required. It had been an industrious and faithful old spirit. The new generation did not intend to be hard on it. They were willing to give it a comfortable home as long as it lived. Its home was to be a beautiful and venerable asylum called the Past. There it was to have nothing to do but to sit around and weep and talk of bygone days. The old spirit rebelled. It refused to abandon its appointed tasks. The notice had been given soon after the new theater was opened in the Sneed block, and the endless flood of moving lights and shadows began to fall on its screen. The low-born, pure-blind intellects of Bohemian New York began to pour their lewd fancies into this great stream that flowed through every city, town, and village in the land. They had no more compunction in the matter than a rattlesnake when it swallows a rabbit. To them there were only 2 great, bare facts in life, male and female. The males, in their vulgar parlance, were either wise guys or suckers. The females were all my dears. Much of this mental sewage smelled to heaven, but it paid. It was cheap and entertaining. It relieved the tedium of small-town life. Judge Crooker was in the little theater the evening that the old spirit of Bingville received notice to quit. The sons and daughters, and even the young children of the best families in the village were there. Scenes from the shady side of the great cities, bar-room adventures with pugilists and porcelain-faced women, the thin ice-skating of illicit love, succeeded one another on the screen. The tender souls of the young received the impression that life in the great world was mostly drunkenness, violence, lust, and great white waywardness of one kind or another. Judge Crooker shook his head and his fist as he went out and expressed his view to Phyllis and her mother in the lobby. Going home, they called him an old prude. The knowledge that every night this false instruction was going on in the Sneed Block filled the good man with sorrow and apprehension. He complained to Mr. Leek, the manager, who said that he would like to have clean shows, but that he had to take what was sent him. Soon a curious thing happened to the family of Mr. J. Patterson Bing. It acquired a new god, one that began, as the reader will have observed, with a small g. He was a boneless, india-rubber, obedient little god. For years the need of one like that had been growing in the Bing family. Since he had become a millionaire, Mr. Bing had found it necessary to spend a good deal of time and considerable money in New York. Certain of his banker friends in the metropolis had introduced him to the joys of the Great White Way and the card room of the Golden Age Club. Always he had been ill and disgruntled for a week after his return to the homely realities of Bingville. The shrewd intuitions of Mrs. Bing alarmed her. So Phyllis and John were packed off to private schools so that the good woman would be free to look after the imperiled welfare of the lamb of her flock, the great J. Patterson. She was really worried about him. After that, she always went with him to the city. She was pleased and delighted with the luxury of the Waldorf Astoria, the costumes, the dinner parties, the theaters, the suppers, the cabaret shows. The latter shocked her a little at first. They went out to a great country house near the city to spend a week-end. There was a dinner party on Saturday night. One of the ladies got very tipsy and was taken upstairs. The others repaired to the music room to drink their coffee and smoke. Mrs. Bing tried a cigarette and got along with it very well. Then there was an hour of heart-to-heart, Central European dancing while the older men sat down for a night of bridge in the library. Sunday morning the young people rode to hounds across country while the bridge party continued its session in the library. It was not exactly a restful week-end. J. Patterson and his wife went to bed as soon as their grips were unpacked on their return to the city and spent the day there with aching heads. While they were eating dinner that night, the cocktail remarked with the lips of Mrs. Bing, "I'm getting tired of Bingville." "Of course, it's a picayune place," said J. Patterson. "It's so provincial," the lady exclaimed. Soon, the oysters and the entrée having subdued the cocktail, she ventured, "But it does seem to me that New York is an awfully wicked place." "What do you mean?" he asked. "Godless," she answered. "The drinking and gambling and those dances." "That's because you've been brought up in a 7x9 Puritan village," J. Patterson growled very decisively. "Why shouldn't people enjoy themselves? We have trouble enough at best. God gave us bodies to get what enjoyment we could out of them. It's about the only thing we're sure of anyhow." It was a principle of Mrs. Bing to agree with J. Patterson. And why not? He was a great man. She knew it as well as he did, and that was knowing it very well indeed. His judgment about many things had been right, triumphantly and overwhelmingly right. Besides, it was the only comfortable thing to do. She had been the type of woman who reads those weird articles written by grass widows on "How to Keep the Love of a Husband." So it happened that the Bings began to construct a little god to suit their own tastes and habits, one about as tractable as a toy dog. They withdrew from the Congregational Church and had house parties for sundry visitors from New York and Hazelmead every week-end. Phyllis returned from school in May with a spirit quite in harmony with that of her parents. She had spent the holidays at the home of a friend in New York and had learned to love the new dances and to smoke, although that was a matter to be mentioned only in a whisper and not in the presence of her parents. She was a tall, handsome girl with blue eyes, blond hair, perfect teeth and complexion, and almost a perfect figure. Here she was, at last, brought up to the point of a coming-out party. It had been a curious and rather unfortunate bringing up that the girl had suffered. She had been the pride of a mother's heart, and the occupier of that position is apt to achieve great success in supplying a mother's friends with topics of conversation. Phyllis had been flattered and indulged. Mrs. Bing was entitled to much credit, having been born of poor and illiterate parents in a small village on the Hudson, a little south of the capital. She was pretty and grew up with a longing for better things. J. Patterson got her at a bargain in an Albany department store where she stood all day behind the notion counter. At a bargain, it must be said, because on the whole there were higher values in her personality than in his. She had acquired that common Bertha Clay habit of associating with noble lords who lived in cheap romances and had a taste for poor but honest girls. The practical J. Patterson hated that kind of thing, but his wife kept a supply of these highly flavored novels hidden in the little flat and spent her leisure reading them. One of the earliest recollections of Phyllis was the caution, "Don't tell father," received on the hiding of a book. Mrs. Bing had bought in those weak, pinching times of poverty extravagant things for herself and the girl and gone in debt for them. Collectors had come at times to get their money with impatient demands. The Bings were living in a city those days. Phyllis had been a witness of many interviews of the kind. All along the way of life she had heard the oft-repeated injunction, "Don't tell father." She came to regard men as creatures who were not to be told. When Phyllis got into a scrape at school, on account of a little flirtation, and Mrs. Bing went to see about it, the two agreed on keeping the salient facts from father. A dressmaker came after Phyllis arrived to get her ready for the party. The afternoon of the event, J. Patterson brought the young people of the best families of Hazelmead by special train to Bingville. The Crookers, the Wetherells, the Ameses, the Renfrews, and a number of the most popular students in the normal school were also invited. They had the famous string band from Hazelmead to furnish music, and Smith, an impressive young English butler whom they had brought from New York on their last return. Phyllis wore a gown which Judge Crooker described as "the limit." He said to his wife after they had gone home, "Why, there was nothing on her back but a pair of velvet galousses, and when I stood in front of her my eyes were seared." "Mrs. Bing calls it high art," said the Judge's wife. "I call it down pretty close to sea level," said the Judge. "When she clinched with those young fellers and went wrestling round the room, she reminded me of a grapevine growing on a tree." This reaction on the intellect of the Judge quite satisfies the need of the historian. Again the old spirit of Bingville had received notice. It is only necessary to add that the punch was strong, and the house party over the week end made a good deal of talk by fast driving around the country in motor cars on Sunday, and by loud singing in boats on the river and noisy play on the tennis courts. That kind of thing was new to Bingville. When it was all over, Phyllis told her mother that Gordon King, one of the young men, had insulted her when they had been out in a boat together on Sunday. Mrs. Bing was shocked. They had a talk about it in Phyllis's bedroom, at the end of which Mrs. Bing repeated that familiar injunction, "Don't tell father." It was soon after the party that Mr. J. Patterson Bing sent for William Snodgrass, the carpenter. He wanted an extension built on his house containing new bedrooms and baths and a large sun parlor. The estimate of Snodgrass was unexpectedly large. In explanation of the fact, the latter said, "We work only 8 hours a day now. The men demand it, and they must be taken to and from their work. They can get all they want to do on those terms." "And they demand $7.50 a day at that? It's big pay for an ordinary mechanic," said J. Patterson. "There's plenty of work to do," Snodgrass answered. I don't care the snap of my fingers whether I get your job or not. I'm 40,000 ahead of the game, and I feel like laying off for the summer and taking a rest." "I suppose I could get you to work overtime and hurry the job through if I'm willing to pay for it?" the millionaire inquired. "The rate would be time and a half, for work done after the 8 hours are up, but it's hard to get anyone to work overtime these days." "Well, go ahead and get all the work you can out of these plutocrats of the saw and hammer. I'll pay the bills," said J. Patterson. The terms created a record in Bingville, but as Mr. Bing had agreed to them, in his haste they were established. Israel Sneed, the plumber, was working with his men on a job in Millerton, but he took on the plumbing for the Bing House extension at prices above all precedent, to be done as soon as he could get to it on his return. The butcher and grocer had improved the opportunity to raise their prices, for Bing never questioned a bill. He set the pace. Prices stuck where he put the peg. So unwittingly the millionaire had created conditions of life that were extremely difficult. Since prices had gone up, the village of Bingville had been running down at the heel. It had been at best, and in the main, a rather shiftless and inert community. The weather had worn the paint off many houses before their owners had seen the need of repainting. Not until the rain drummed on the floor was the average drowsy intellect of Bingville roused to action on the roof. It must be said, however, that everyone was busy every day except Hiram Blenkinsop, who often indulged in ante mortem slumbers in the graveyard, or went out on the river with his dog Christmas, his bottle, and his fishing rod. The people were selling goods, or teaming, or working in the 2 hotels, or the machine shop, or the electric light plant, or the mill, or keeping the hay off the lawns, or building, or teaching in the schools. The gardens were suffering unusual neglect that season, their owners being so profitably engaged in other work, and the lazy foreigners demanded $4.50 a day and had to be watched and sworn at and instructed, and not every one had the versatility for this task. The gardens were largely dependent on the spasmodic industry of schoolboys and old men. So it will be seen that the work of the community had little effect on the supply of things necessary to life. Indeed, a general habit of extravagance had been growing in the village. People were not so careful of food, fuel, and clothing as they had been. It was a wet summer in Bingville. The day after the rains began, Professor Renfrew called at the house of the sniffy Snodgrass, the nouveau riche and opulent carpenter. He sat reading the morning paper with a new diamond ring on the 3rd finger of his left hand. "My roof is leaking badly and it will have to be fixed at once," the professor announced. "I'm sorry I can't do a thing for you now," said Snodgrass. "I've got so much to do I don't know which way to turn." "But you're not working this rainy day, are you?" the professor asked. "No, and I don't propose to work in this rain for anybody. If I did, I'd fix my own roof. To tell you the truth, I don't have to work at all. I calculate that I've got all the money I need. So when it rains, I intend to rest and get acquainted with my family." He was firm, but in no way disagreeable about it. Some of the half-dozen men who, in like trouble, called on him for help that day, were inclined to resent his declaration of independence and his devotion to leisure, but really Mr. Snodgrass was well within his rights. It was a more serious matter when Judge Crocker's plumbing leaked and flooded his kitchen and cellar. Israel Sneed was in Millerton every day and working overtime, more or less. He refused to put a hand on the Judge's pipes. He was sorry, but he couldn't make a horse of himself, and even if he could, the time was past when he had to do it. Judge Crooker brought a plumber from Hazelmead, 60 miles, in a motor car, and had to pay $70 for time, labor, and materials. This mechanic declared that there was too much pressure on the pipes, a judgment of whose accuracy we have abundant proof in the history of the next week or so. Never had there been such a bursting of pipes and flooding of cellars. That little lake up in the hills which supplied the water of Bingville seemed to have got the common notion of moving into the village. A dozen cellars were turned into swimming pools. Modern improvements were going out of commission. A committee went to Hazelmead and after a week's pleading got a pair of young and inexperienced plumbers to come to Bingville. "They must have plugged 'em with gold," said Deacon Hosley when the bill arrived. New leaks were forthcoming, but Hiram Blenkinsop conceived the notion of stopping them with poultices of white lead and bandages of canvas bound with fine wire. They dripped, and many of the pipes of Bingville looked as if they were suffering from sprained ankles and sore throats, but Hiram had prevented another deluge. The price of coal had driven the people of Bingville back to the woods for fuel. The old wood stoves had been cleaned and set up in the sitting rooms and kitchens. The saving had been considerable. Now, so many men were putting in their time on the house and grounds of J. Patterson Bing and the new factory at Millerton that the local wood dealer found it impossible to get the help he needed. Not 25% of the orders on his book could be filled. Mr. Bing's house was finished in October. Then Snodgrass announced that he was going to take it easy as became a man of his opulence. He had bought a farm and would only work 3 days a week at his trade. Sneed had also bought a farm and acquired a feeling of opulence. He was going to work when he felt like it. Before he tackled any leaking pipes, he proposed to make a few leaks in the Deer up in the Adirondacks, so the roofs and the plumbing had to wait. Meanwhile, Bingville was in sore trouble. The ancient roof of its respectability had begun to leak. The beams and rafters in the house of its spirit were rotting away. Many of the inhabitants of the latter regarded the great J. Patterson Bing with a kind of awe like that of the shepherd of the birds. He was the leading citizen. He had done things. When J. Patterson Bing decided that rest or fresh air was better for him than bad music and dull prayers and sermons, and that God was really not much concerned as to whether a man sat in a pew or a rocking chair or a motor car on Sunday, he was, probably, quite right. Really, it was a matter much more important to Mr. Bing and his neighbors than to God. Indeed, it is not at all likely that the ruler of the universe was worrying much about them. But when J. Patterson Bing decided in favor of fun and fresh air, R. Purdy, druggist, made a like decision, and R. Purdy was a man of commanding influence in his own home. His daughters, Mabel and Gladys, and his son, Richard, Jr., would not have been surprised to see him elected President of the United States some day, believing that that honor was only for the truly great. Soon Mrs. Purdy stood alone, a hopeless minority of one, in the household. By much pleading and nagging she kept the children in the fold of the church for a time, but by and by grew weary of the effort. She was converted by nervous exhaustion to the picnic Sunday. Her conscience worried her. She really felt sorry for God and made sundry remarks calculated to appease and comfort him. Now all this would seem to have been in itself a matter of slight importance. But Orville Gates, the superintendent of the mill, and John Seaver, attorney at law, and Robert Brown, the grocer, and Pendleton Ames, who kept the book and stationery store, and William Ferguson, the clothier, and Darwin Sill, the butcher, and Snodgrass, the carpenter, and others had joined the picnic caravan led by the millionaire. These good people would not have admitted it, but the truth is, J. Patterson Bing held them all in the hollow of his hand. Nobody outside his own family had any affection for him. Outwardly he was as hard as nails. But he owned the bank and controlled credits and was an extravagant buyer. He had given freely for the improvement of the village and the neighboring city of Hazelmead. His family was the court circle of Bingville. Consciously or unconsciously, the best people imitated the Bings. Judge Crooker was one day discussing with a friend the social conditions of Bingville. In regard to picnic Sundays, he made this remark: "George Meredith once wrote to his son that he would need the help of religion to get safely beyond the stormy passions of youth. It is very true." The historian was reminded of this saying by the undertow of the life currents in Bingville. The dances in the normal school and in the homes of the well-to-do were imitations of the great party at J. Patterson Bing's. The costumes of certain of the young ladies were, to quote a clause from the posters of the Messrs. Barnum and Bailey still clinging to the billboard, "the most daring and amazing bareback performances in the history of the circus ring." Phyllis Bing, the unrivaled metropolitan performer, set the pace. It was distinctly too rapid for her followers. If one may say it kindly, she was as cold and heartless and beautiful in her act as a piece of bronze or Italian marble. She was not ashamed of herself. She did it so easily and gracefully and unconsciously and obligingly, so to speak, as if her license had never been questioned. It was not so with Vivian Mead and Frances Smith and Pauline Baker. They limped and struggled in their efforts to keep up. To begin with, the art of their modiste had been fussy, imitative, and timid. It lacked the master touch. Their spirits were also improperly prepared for such publicity. They blushed and looked apologies and were visibly uncomfortable when they entered the dance-hall. On this point Judge Crooker delivered a famous opinion. It was, "I feel sorry for those girls, but their mothers ought to be spanked." There is evidence that this sentence of his was carried out in due time and in a most effectual manner. But the works of art which these mothers had put on exhibition at the normal school sprang into overwhelming popularity with the young men, and their cards were quickly filled. In half an hour they had ceased to blush. Their eyes no longer spoke apologies. They were new women. Their initiation was complete. They had become, in the language of Judge Crooker, perfect Philistines. The dancing tried to be as naughty as that remarkable Philistinian pastime at the mansion of the Bings, and succeeded well, if not handsomely. The modern dances and dress were now definitely established in Bingville. Just before the holidays, the extension of the ample home of the millionaire was decorated, furnished, and ready to be shown. Mrs. Bing and Phyllis, who had been having a fling in New York, came home for the holidays. John arrived the next day from the great Padelford school to be with the family through the winter recess. Mrs. Bing gave a tea to the ladies of Bingville. She wanted them to see the improvements and become aware of her good will. She had thought of an evening party, but there were many men in the village whom she didn't care to have in her house, so it became a tea. The women talked of leaking roofs and water pipes and useless bathrooms and outrageous costs. Phyllis sat in the palm room with the village girls. It happened that they talked mainly about their fathers. Some had complained of paternal strictness. "Men are terrible. They make so much trouble," said Frances Smith. "It seems as if they hated to see anybody have a good time." "Mother and I do as we please and say nothing," said Phyllis. "We never tell Father anything. Men don't understand." Some of the girls smiled and looked into one another's eyes. There had been a curious undercurrent in the party. It did not break the surface of the stream until Mrs. Bing asked Mrs. Pendleton Ames, "Where is Susan Baker?" A silence fell upon the group around her. Mrs. Ames leaned toward Mrs. Bing and whispered, "Haven't you heard the news?" "No. I had to scold Susan Crowder and Martha Featherstraw as soon as I got here for neglecting their work, and they've hardly spoken to me since. What is it?" "Pauline Baker has run away with a strange young man," Mrs. Ames whispered. Mrs. Bing threw up both hands, opened her mouth, and looked toward the ceiling. "You don't mean it!" she gasped. "It's a fact. Susan told me. Mr. Baker doesn't know the truth yet, and she doesn't dare to tell him. She's scared stiff. Pauline went over to Hazelmead last week to visit Emma Stacy against his wishes. She met the young man at a dance. Susan got a letter from Pauline last night making a clean breast of the matter. They are married and stopping at a hotel in New York." "My Lord! I should think she would be scared stiff," said Mrs. Bing. "I think there is a good reason for the stiffness of Susan," said Mrs. Singleton, the wife of the Congregational minister. "We all know that Mr. Baker objected to these modern dances and the way that Pauline dressed. He used to say that it was walking on the edge of a precipice." There was a breath of silence, in which one could hear only a faint rustle like the stir of some invisible spirit. Mrs. Bing sighed. "He may be all right," she said in a low, calm voice. "But the indications are not favorable," Mrs. Singleton remarked. The gossip ceased abruptly, for the girls were coming out of the palm room. The next morning Mrs. Bing went to see Susan Baker to offer sympathy and a helping hand. Mamie Bing was, after all, a good-hearted woman. By this time Mr. Baker had been told. He had kicked a hole in the long looking-glass in Pauline's bedroom and flung a pot of rouge through the window and scattered talcum powder all over the place and torn a new silk gown into rags and burnt it in the kitchen stove and left the house slamming the door behind him. Susan had gone to bed and he had probably gone to the club or somewhere. Perhaps he would commit suicide. Of all this, it is enough to say that for some hours there was abundant occupation for the tender sympathies of Mrs. J. Patterson Bing. Before she left, Mr. Baker had returned for luncheon and seemed to be quite calm and self-possessed when he greeted her in the hall below stairs. On entering her home about 1 o'clock, Mrs. Bing received a letter from the hand of Martha. "Phyllis told me to give you this as soon as you returned," said the girl. "What does this mean?" Mrs. Bing whispered to herself as she tore open the envelope. Her face grew pale and her hands trembled as she read the letter. "Dearest Mamma," it began, "I am going to Hazelmead for luncheon with Gordon King. I couldn't ask you because I didn't know where you were. We have waited an hour. I am sure you wouldn't want me to miss having a lovely time. I shall be home before 5. Don't tell Father. He hates Gordon so. Phyllis." "The boy who insulted her! My God!" Mrs. Bing exclaimed in a whisper. She hurried to the door of the butler's pantry. Indignation was in the sound of her footsteps. "Martha!" she called. Martha came. "Tell James to bring the big car at once. I'm going to Hazelmead." "Without luncheon?" the girl asked. "Just give me a sandwich and I'll eat it in my hand." "I want you to hurry," she said to James as she entered the glowing limousine with the sandwich half consumed. They drove at top speed over the smooth state road to the mill city. At 2:30 Mrs. Bing alighted at the fashionable Grey Goose Inn where the best people had their luncheon parties. She found Phyllis and Gordon in a cozy alcove, sipping cognac and smoking cigarettes, with an ice tub and a champagne bottle beside them. To tell the whole truth, it was a timely arrival. Phyllis, with no notion of the peril of it, was indeed having a lovely time, the time of her young life, in fact. For half an hour she had been hanging on the edge of the giddy precipice of elopement. She was within one sip of a decision to let go. Mrs. Bing was admirably cool. In her manner there was little to indicate that she had seen the unusual and highly festive accessories. She sat down beside them and said, "My dear, I was very lonely and thought I would come and look you up. Is your luncheon finished?" "Yes," said Phyllis. "Then let us go and get into the car. We'll drop Mr. King at his home." When they were at last seated in the limousine, the angry lady lifted the brakes, in a way of speaking. "I am astonished that you would go to luncheon with this young man who has insulted you," she said. Phyllis began to cry. Turning to young Gordon King, the indignant lady added, "I think you are a disreputable boy. You must never come to my house again. Never." He made no answer and left the car without a word at the door of the King residence. There were miles and miles of weeping on the way home. Phyllis had recovered her composure, but began again when her mother remarked, "I wonder where you learned to drink champagne and cognac and smoke cigarettes," as if her own home had not been a perfect academy of dissipation. The girl sat in a corner, her eyes covered with her handkerchief, and the only words she uttered on the way home were these: "Don't tell Father." While this was happening, Mr. Baker confided his troubles to Judge Crooker in the latter's office. The Judge heard him through, and then delivered another notable opinion, to wit: "There are many subjects on which the judgment of the average man is of little value, but in the matter of bringing up a daughter it is apt to be sound. Also there are many subjects on which the judgment of the average woman may be trusted, but in the matter of bringing up a daughter it is apt to be unsound. I say this after some 40 years of observation." "What is the reason?" Mr. Baker asked. "Well, a daughter has to be prepared to deal with men," the Judge went on. "The masculine temperament is involved in all the critical problems of her life. Naturally, the average man is pretty well informed on the subject of men. You have prospered these last years. You have been so busy getting rich that you have just used your home to eat and sleep in. You can't do a home any good by eating and snoring and reading a paper in it." "My wife would have her own way there," said Baker. "That doesn't alter the fact that you have neglected your home. You have let things slide. You wore yourself out in this matter of money getting. You were tired when you got home at night. All in, as they say. The bank was the main thing with you. I repeat that you let things slide at home, and the longer they slide, the faster they slide when they're going downhill. You can always count on that in a case of sliding. The young have a taste for velocity, and often it comes so unaccountably fast that they don't know what to do with it, so they're apt to get their necks broken, unless there's someone to put on the brakes." Mr. Emanuel Baker arose and began to stride up and down the room. "Upon my word, Judge, I don't know what to do," he exclaimed. "There's only one thing to do. Go and find the young couple and give them your blessing. If you can discover a spark of manhood in the fellow, make the most of it. The chances are against that, but let us hope for the best. Above all, I want you to be gentle with Pauline. You are more to blame than she is." "I don't see how I can spare the time, but I'll have to," said Baker. "Time! Fiddlesticks!" the Judge exclaimed. "What a darn fool money makes of a man! You have lost your sense of proportion, your appreciation of values. Bill Pritchard used to talk that way to me. He has been lying 20 years in his grave. He hadn't a minute to spare until one day he fell dead. Then leisure, and lots of leisure, it would seem, and the business had doubled since he quit worrying about it. My friend, you cannot take a cent into paradise, but the soul of Pauline is a different kind of property. It might be a help to you there. Give plenty of time to this job, and good luck to you." The spirit of the old dead days spoke in the voice of the Judge, spoke with a kindly dignity. It had ever been the voice of justice tempered with mercy, the most feared and respected voice in the upper counties. His grave, smooth-shaven face, his kindly gray eyes, his noble brow with its crown of white hair were fitting accessories of the throne of justice and mercy. "I'll go this afternoon. Thank you, Judge," said Baker as he left the office. Pauline had announced in her letter that her husband's name was Herbert Middleton. Mr. Baker sent a telegram to Pauline to apprise her of his arrival in the morning. It was a fatherly message of love and good will. At the hotel in New York, Mr. Baker learned that Mr. and Mrs. Middleton had checked out the day before. Nobody could tell him where they had gone. One of the men at the porter's desk told of putting them in a taxicab with their grips and a steamer trunk, soon after luncheon. He didn't know where they went. Mr. Baker's telegram was there unopened. He called at every hotel desk in the city, but he could get no trace of them. He telephoned to Mrs. Baker. She had heard nothing from Pauline. In despair, he went to the police department and told his story to the chief. "It looks as if there was something crooked about it," said the chief. "There are many cases like this. Just read that." The officer picked up a newspaper clipping which lay on his desk and passed it to Mr. Baker. It was from the New York Evening Post. The banker read aloud this startling information: The New York police report that approximately blank girls have run away or disappeared from their homes in the last 11 months, and the Bureau of Missing Persons estimates that the number who have disappeared throughout the country approximates blank. "It's rather astonishing," the chief went on. "The women seem to have gone crazy these days. Maybe it's the new dancing and the movies that are breaking down the morals of the little suburban towns, or maybe it's the excitement of the war. Anyhow, they keep the city supplied with runaways and vamps. You are not the first anxious father I have seen today. You can go home. I'll put a man on the case and let you know what happens." End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of The Prodigal Village, A Christmas Tale by Irving Bacheller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3, which tells of the complaining coin and the man who lost his self. There was a certain gold coin in a little bureau drawer in Bingville, which began to form a habit of complaining to its master. "How cold I am!" it seemed to say to the boy. "I was cold when you put me in here, and I have been cold ever since. Brrr! I'm freezing." Bob Moran took out the little drawer and gave it a shaking as he looked down at the gold piece. "Don't get rattled," said the redoubtable Mr. Bloggs, who had a great contempt for cowards. It was just after the Shepherd of the Birds had heard of a poor widow who was the mother of 2 small children, and who had fallen sick of the influenza with no fuel for her house. "I am cold, too," said the Shepherd. "Why, of course you are," the coin answered. "That's the reason I'm cold. A coin is never any warmer than the heart of its owner. Why don't you take me out of here and give me a chance to move around?" Things that would not say a word to other boys often spoke to the Shepherd. "Let him go," said Mr. Bloggs. Indeed, it was the tin soldier who stood on his little shelf looking out of the window who first reminded Bob of the loneliness and discomfort of the coin. As a rule, whenever the conscience of the boy was touched, Mr. Bloggs had something to say. It was late in February, and everyone was complaining of the cold. Even the oldest inhabitants of Bingville could not recall so severe a winter. Many families were short of fuel. The homes of the working folk were insufficiently heated. Money in the bank had given them a sense of security. They could not believe that its magic power would fail to bring them what they needed. So they had been careless of their allowance of wood and coal. There were days when they had none and could get none at the yard. Some of them took boards out of their barn floors and cut down shade trees and broke up the worst of their furniture to feed the kitchen stove in those days of famine. Some men with hundreds of dollars in the bank went out into the country at night and stole rails off the farmers' fences. The homes of these unfortunate people were ravaged by influenza, and many died. Prices at the stores mounted higher. Most of the gardens had been lying idle. The farmers had found it hard to get help. Some of the latter, indeed, had decided that they could make more by teaming at Millerton than by toiling in the fields, and with less effort. They left the boys and the women to do what they could with the crops. Naturally, the latter were small, so the local sources of supply had little to offer, and the demand upon the stores steadily increased. Certain of the merchants had been, in a way, spoiled by prosperity. They were rather indifferent to complaints and demands. Many of the storekeepers, irritated doubtless by overwork, had lost their former politeness. The 2 butchers, having prospered beyond their hopes, began to feel the need of rest. They cut down their hours of labor and reduced their stocks and raised their prices. There were days when their supplies failed to arrive. The railroad service had been bad enough in times of peace. Now it was worse than ever. Those who had plenty of money found it difficult to get a sufficient quantity of good food, Bingville being rather cut off from other centers of life by distance and a poor railroad. Some drove 60 miles to Hazelmead to do marketing for themselves and their neighbors. Mr. and Mrs. J. Patterson Bing, however, in their luxurious apartment at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York, knew little of these conditions until Mr. Bing came up late in March for a talk with the mill superintendent. Many of the sick and poor suffered extreme privation. Father O'Neill and the Reverend Otis Singleton of the Congregational Church went among the people, ministering to the sick, of whom there were very many, and giving counsel to men and women who were unaccustomed to prosperity and ill-qualified wisely to enjoy it. One day Father O'Neill saw the Widow Moran coming into town with a great bundle of faggots on her back. "This looks a little like the old country," he remarked. She stopped and swung her faggots to the ground and announced, "It do that, and may God help us. It's hard times, Father. In spite all the money, it's hard times. It looks like there wasn't enough to go around. The ships be taking so many things to the old country." "How is my beloved shepherd?" the good Father asked. "Mother of God, the house is that cold he's been laying abed for a week, and Judge Crooker has been away on the circuit." "Too bad," said the priest. "I've been so busy with the sick and the dying and the dead, I have hardly had time to think of you." Against her protest, he picked up the faggots and carried them on his own back to her kitchen. He found the shepherd in a sweater, sitting up in bed and knitting socks. "How is my dear boy?" the good Father asked. "Very sad," said the shepherd. "I want to do something to help, and my legs are useless." "Courage!" Mr. Bloggs seemed to shout from his shelf at the window side, and just then he assumed a most valiant and determined look as he added, "Forward, march!" Father O'Neill did what he could to help in that moment of peril by saying, "Cheer up, boy. I'm going out to Dan Mullins this afternoon, and I'll make him bring you a big load of wood. I'll have you back at your work tomorrow. The spring will be coming soon, and your flock will be back in the garden." It was not easy to bring a smile to the face of the little shepherd those days. A number of his friends had died and others were sick, and he was helpless. Moreover, his mother had told him of the disappearance of Pauline and that her parents feared she was in great trouble. This had worried him, and the more because his mother had declared that the girl was probably worse than dead. He could not quite understand it, and his happy spirit was clouded. The good Father cheered him with merry jests. Near the end of their talk, the boy said, "There's one thing in this room that makes me unhappy. It's that gold piece in the drawer. It does nothing but lie there and shiver and talk to me. Seems as if it complained of the cold. It says that it wants to move around and get warm. Every time I hear of some poor person that needs food or fuel, it calls out to me there in the little drawer and says, 'How cold I am! How cold I am!' My mother wishes me to keep it for some time of trouble that may come to us, but I can't. It makes me unhappy. Please take it away and let it do what it can to keep the poor people warm." "Well done, boys!" Mr. Bloggs seemed to say with a look of joy, as if he now perceived that the enemy was in full retreat. "There's no worse company these days than a hoarded coin," said the priest. "I won't let it plague you any more." Father O'Neill took the coin from the drawer. It fell from his fingers with a merry laugh as it bounded on the floor and whirled toward the doorway like one overjoyed and eager to be off. "God bless you, my boy. May it buy for you the dearest wish of your heart." "Ha, ha!" laughed the little tin soldier, for he knew the dearest wish of the boy far better than the priest knew it. Mr. Singleton called soon after Father O'Neill had gone away. "The top of the morning to you," he shouted as he came into Bob's room. "It's all right, top and bottom," Bob answered cheerfully. "Is there anything I can do for you?" the minister went on. "I'm a regular Santa Claus this morning. I've got $1,000 that Mr. Bing sent me. It's for anyone that needs help." "We'll be all right as soon as our load of wood comes. It will be here tomorrow morning," said the shepherd. "I'll come and cut and split it for you," the minister proposed. "The eloquence of the axe is better than that of the tongue these days. Meanwhile, I'm going to bring you a little jag in my wheelbarrow. How about beefsteak and bacon and eggs and all that?" "I guess we've got enough to eat, thank you." This was not quite true, for Bob, thinking of the sick whose people could not go to the market, was inclined to hide his own hunger. "Ho, ho!" exclaimed Mr. Bloggs, for he knew very well that the boy was hiding his hunger. "Do you call that a lie?" the Shepherd asked as soon as the minister had gone. "A little one, but in my opinion it don't count," said Mr. Bloggs. "You were thinking of others who need food more than you, and that turns it square around. I call it a golden lie, I do." The minister had scarcely turned the corner of the street when he met Hiram Blenkinsop, who was shivering along without an overcoat, the dog Christmas at his heels. Mr. Singleton stopped him. "Why, man, haven't you an overcoat?" he asked. "No, sir, it's hanging on a peg in a pawnshop over in Hazelmead. Ain't doing the peg any good, nor me neither." "Well, sir, you come with me," said the minister. "It's about dinner time anyway, and I guess you need linin' as well as coverin'." The drunkard looked into the face of the minister. "Say it again," he muttered. "I wouldn't wonder if a little food would make you feel better," Mr. Singleton added. "A little, did you say?" Blenkinsop asked. "Make it a lot, as much as you can accommodate." "And do you mean you want me to go and eat at your house?" "Yes, at my table. Why not?" "It wouldn't be respectable. I don't want to be too particular, but a tramp must draw the line somewhere." "I'll be on my best behavior. Come on," said the minister. The two men hastened up the street, followed by the dejected little yellow dog Christmas. Mrs. Singleton and her daughter were out with a committee of the Children's Helpers, and the minister was dining alone that day, and, as usual, at 1 o'clock, that being the hour for dinner in the village of Bingville. "Tell me about yourself," said the minister as they sat down at the table. "Myself, did you say?" Hiram Blenkinsop asked as one of his feet crept under his chair to conceal its disreputable appearance, while his dog had partly hidden himself under a serving table, where he seemed to be shivering with apprehension as he peered out, with raised hackles, at the stag's head over the mantel. "Yes." "I ain't got any self, sir. It's all gone," said Blenkinsop as he took a swallow of water. "A man without any self is a curious creature," the minister remarked. "I'm as empty as a woodpecker's hole in the winter time. The bird has flown. I belong to this here dog. He's a poor dog. I'm all he's got. If he had to pay a license on me, I'd have to be killed. He's kind to me. He's the only friend I've got." Hiram Blenkinsop riveted his attention upon an old warming pan that hung by the fireplace. He hardly looked at the face of the minister. "How did you come to lose yourself?" the latter asked. "Married a bad woman and took to drink. A man's self can stand cold and hunger and shipwreck and loss of friends and money and any quantity of bad luck, take it as it comes. But a bad woman breaks the works in him and stops his clock dead. Leastways, it done that to me." "She is like an arrow in his liver," the minister quoted. "Mr. Blenkinsop, where do you stay nights?" "I've got a shakedown in the little loft over the old blacksmith shop on Water Street. There are cracks in the gable, and the snow and the wind blows in, and the place is dark and smells of coal gas and horses' feet. But Christmas and I snug up there together and manage to live through the winter. In hot weather we sleep under a tree in the old graveyard and study astronomy. Sometimes I wish I was there for good." "Wouldn't you like a bed in a comfortable house?" "No, I couldn't take the dog there, and I'd have to get up like other folks." "Would you think that a hardship?" "Well, you see, sir, if you're layin' down you ain't hungry. Then, too, I likes to dilly-dally in bed." "What may that mean?" the minister asked. "I likes to lay and think and build air castles." "What kind of castles?" "Well, sir, I'm thinking often o' a time when I'll have a grand suit of clothes and a shiny silk tile on my head and a roll of bills in my pocket big enough to choke a dog, and I'll be going back to the town where I was brought up, and I'll hire a fine team and take my old mother out for a ride, and when we pass by people will be saying, 'That's Hiram Blenkinsop. Don't you remember him? Born on the top floor of the old sash mill on the island. He's a multimillionaire and a great man. He gives 1,000 to the poor every day. Sure he does.'" "Blenkinsop, I'd like to help you recover your lost self and be a useful and respected citizen of this town," said Mr. Singleton. "You can do it if you will, and I can tell you how." Tears began to stream down the cheeks of the unfortunate man, who now covered his eyes with a big, rough hand. "If you will make an honest effort, I'll stand by you. I'll be your friend through thick and thin," the minister added. "There's something good in you, or you wouldn't be having a dream like that." "Nobody's ever talked to me this way," poor Blenkinsop sobbed. "Nobody but you has ever treated me as if I was human." I know. It's a hard old world. But at last you found a man who is willing to be a brother to you if you really want one." The poor man rose from the table and went to the minister's side and held out his hand. "I do want a brother, sir, and I'll do anything at all," he said in a broken voice. "Then come with me," the minister commanded. "First I'm going to improve the outside of you." When they were ready to leave the house, Blenkinsop and his dog had had a bath, and the former was shaved, and in clean and respectable garments from top to toe. "You look like a new man," said Mr. Singleton. "Seems like. I felt more like a proper human bein'," Blenkinsop answered. Christmas was scampering up and down the hall as if he felt like a new dog. Suddenly he discovered the stag's head again and slunk into a dark corner, growling. "A bath is a good sort of baptism," the minister remarked. "Here's an overcoat that I haven't worn for a year. It's fairly warm, too. Now, if your old self should happen to come in sight of you, maybe he'll move back into his home. I remember once that we had a canary bird that got away. We hung his cage in one of the trees out in the yard with some food in it. By and by we found him singing on the perch in his little home. Now, if we put some good food in the cage, maybe your bird will come back. Our work has only just begun." They went out of the door and crossed the street and entered the big stone Congregational church and sat down together in a pew. A soft light came through the great jeweled windows above the altar and in the clerestory and over the organ loft. They were the gift of Mr. Bing. It was a quiet, restful, beautiful place. "I used to stand in the pulpit there and look down upon a crowd of handsomely dressed people," said Mr. Singleton in a low voice. "There's something wrong about this, I thought. There's too much respectability here. There are no flannel shirts and gingham dresses in the place. I cannot see half a dozen poor people. I wish there was some ragged clothing down there in the pews. There isn't an out-and-out sinner in the crowd. Have we set up a little private God of our own that cares only for the rich and respectable? I ask myself. This is the place for Hiram Blenkinsop and old Bill Lang and poor Lizzie Quinsnell. If they only knew it! These are the kind of people that Jesus cared most about. They're beginning to come to us now, and we are glad of it. I want to see you here every Sunday after this. I want you to think of this place as your home. If you really wish to be my brother, come with me." Blenkinsop trembled with strange excitement as he went with Mr. Singleton down the broad aisle, the dog Christmas following meekly. Man and minister knelt before the altar. Christmas sat down by his master's side in a prayerful attitude, as if he too were seeking help and forgiveness. "I feel better inside and outside," said Blenkinsop as they were leaving the church. "When you are tempted, there are 3 words which may be useful to you. They are these: 'God help me,'" the minister told him. "They are quickly said, and I have often found them a source of strength in time of trouble. I'm going to find work for you, and there's a room over my garage with a stove in it which will make a very snug little home for you and Christmas." That evening, as the dog and his master were sitting comfortably by the stove in their new home, there came a rap at the door. In a moment Judge Crooker entered the room. "Mr. Blenkinsop," said the judge as he held out his hand, "I have heard of your new plans, and I want you to know that I am very glad. Everyone will be glad." When the judge had gone, Blenkinsop put his hand on the dog's head and asked with a little laugh, "Did you hear what he said, Christmas? He called me Mister. Never done that before. No, sir." Mr. Blenkinsop sat with his head upon his hand, listening to the wind that whistled mournfully in the chimney. Suddenly he shouted, "Come in!" The door opened, and there on the threshold stood his old self. It was not at all the kind of a self one would have expected to see. It was indeed a very youthful and handsome self, the figure of a clear-eyed, gentle-faced boy of about 16, with curly dark hair above his brows. Mr. Blenkinsop covered his face and groaned. Then he held out his hands with an imploring gesture. "I know you," he whispered. "Please come in." "Not yet," the young man answered, and his voice was like the wind in the chimney. "But I have come to tell you that I, too, am glad." And then he vanished. Mr. Blenkinsop arose from his chair and rubbed his eyes. "Christmas, old boy, I've been asleep," he muttered. "I guess it's time we turned in." End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4 of The Prodigal Village, A Christmas Tale, by Irving Bacheller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4, in which Mr. Israel Sneed and other working men receive a lesson in true democracy. Next morning Mr. Blenkinsop went to cut wood for the Widow Moran. The good woman was amazed by his highly respectable appearance. "God help us, ye look like a lawyer," she said. "I'm a new man. Cut out the blacksmith shop and the booze and the bummers. May the good God love and help ye, I heard about it." "You did?" "Sure I did. It's all over the town. Good news has a lively foot, man. The shepherd clapped his hands when I told him. You got to go straight, my laddie buck. All eyes are on you now. Come on and see the boy. It's his birthday." Mr. Blenkinsop was deeply moved by the greeting of the little shepherd, who kissed his cheek and said that he had often prayed for him. "If you ever get lonely, come and sit with me, and we'll have a talk and a game of dominoes," said the boy. Mr. Blenkinsop got strength out of the wonderful spirit of Bob Moran, and as he swung his axe that day he was happier than he had been in many years. Men and women who passed in the streets said, "How do you do, Mr. Blenkinsop? I'm glad to see you." Even the dog Christmas watched his master with a look of pride and approval. Now and then he barked gleefully and scampered up and down the sidewalk. The shepherd was 14 years old. On his birthday, from morning till night, people came to his room, bringing little gifts to remind him of their affection. No one in the village of Bingville was so much beloved. Judge Crooker came in the evening with ice cream and a frosted cake. While he was there, a committee of citizens sought him out to confer with him regarding conditions in Bingville. "There's more money than ever in the place, but there never was so much misery," said the chairman of the committee. "We have learned that money is not the thing that makes happiness," Judge Crooker began. "With everyone busy at high wages and the banks overflowing with deposits, we felt safe. We ceased to produce the necessaries of life in a sufficient quantity. We forgot that the all-important things are food, fuel, clothes, and comfortable housing, not money. Some of us went money mad. With a feeling of opulence, we refused to work at all, save when we felt like it. We bought diamond rings and sat by the fire looking at them. The roofs began to leak and our plumbing went wrong. People going to buy meat found the shops closed. Roofs that might have been saved by timely repairs will have to be largely replaced. Plumbing systems have been ruined by neglect. With all its money, the town was never so poverty-stricken, the people never so wretched." Mr. Sneed, who was a member of the committee, slyly turned the ring on his finger so that the diamond was concealed. He cleared his throat and remarked, "We mechanics had more than we could do on work already contracted." "Yes, you worked 8 hours a day and refused to work any longer. You were legally within your rights, but your position was ungrateful and even heartless and immoral. Suppose there were a baby coming at your house and you should call for the doctor and he should say, 'I'm sorry, but I have done my 8 hours' work today and I can't help you.' Then suppose you should offer him a double fee and he should say, 'No, thanks, I'm tired. I've got $40,000 in the bank and I don't want to work when I don't want to.' Or suppose I were trying a case for you, and when my 8 hours' work had expired I should walk out of the court and leave your case to take care of itself. What do you suppose would become of it? Yet that is exactly what you did to my pipes. You left them to take care of themselves. You men who use your hands make a great mistake in thinking that you are workers of the country and that the rest of us are your natural enemies. In America we are all workers. The idle man is a mere parasite and not at heart an American. Generally I work 15 hours a day. This little lad has been knitting night and day for the soldiers without hope of reward and has spent his savings for yarn. There isn't a doctor in Bingville who isn't working 18 hours a day. I met a minister this afternoon who hasn't had 10 hours of sleep in a week. He's been so busy with the sick and the dying and the dead. He is a nurse, a friend, a comforter to anyone who needs him. No charge for overtime. My God, are we all going money mad? Are you any better than he is, or I am, or than these doctors are, who have been killing themselves with overwork? Do you dare to tell me that prosperity is any excuse for idleness in this land of ours, if one's help is needed?" Judge Crooker's voice had been calm, his manner dignified, but the last sentences had been spoken with a quiet sternness and with his long, bony forefinger pointing straight at Mr. Sneed. The other members of the committee clapped their hands in hearty approval. Mr. Sneed smiled and brushed his trousers. "I guess you're right," he said. "We're all off our balance a little. But what is to be done now? We must quit our plumbing and carpentering and lawyering and banking, and some of us must quit merchandising and sitting in the chimney corner and grab our saws and axes and go out into the woods and make some fuel and get it hauled into town," said Judge Crooker. "I'll be one of a party to go tomorrow with my axe. I haven't forgotten how to chop." The committee thought this a good suggestion. They all rose and started on a search for volunteers, except Mr. Sneed. He tarried, saying to the Judge that he wished to consult him on a private matter. It was indeed just then a matter which could not have been more public, although, so far, the news of it had traveled in whispers. The Judge had learned the facts since his return. "I hope your plumbing hasn't gone wrong," he remarked with a smile. "No, it's worse than that," said Mr. Sneed ruefully. They bade the little shepherd good night and went downstairs, where the widow was still at work with her washing, although it was 9 o'clock. "Faithful woman!" the Judge exclaimed as they went out on the street. "What would the world do without people like that? No extra charge for overtime, either." Then, as they walked along, he cunningly paved the way for what he knew was coming. "Did you notice the face of that boy?" he asked. "Yes, it's a wonderful face," said Israel Sneed. "It's a God's blessing to see a face like that," the Judge went on. "Only the pure in heart can have it. The old spirit of youth looks out of his eyes, the spirit of my own youth. When I was 14, I think that my heart was as pure as his. So were the hearts of most of the boys I knew." "It isn't so now," said Mr. Sneed. "I fear it isn't," the Judge answered. "There's a new look in the face of the young. Every variety of evil is spread before them on the stage of our little theater. They see it while their characters are in the making, while their minds are like white wax. Everything that touches them leaves a mark or a smirch. It addresses them in the one language they all understand, and for which no dictionary is needed: pictures. The flower of youth fades fast enough, God knows, without the withering knowledge of evil. They say it's good for the boys and girls to know all about life. We shall see." Mr. Sneed sat down with Judge Crooker in the handsome library of the latter and opened his heart. His son Richard, a boy of 15, and 3 other lads of the village had been committing small burglaries and storing their booty in a cave in a piece of woods on the river bank near the village. A constable had secured a confession and recovered a part of the booty. Enough had been found to warrant a charge of grand larceny, and Elisha Potts, whose store had been entered, was clamoring for the arrest of the boys. "It reminds me of that picture of the robber's cave that was on the billboard of our school of crime a few weeks ago," said the Judge. "I'm tired enough to lie down, but I'll go and see Elisha Potts. If he's abed, he'll have to get up, that's all. There's no telling what Potts has done or may do. Your plumbing is in bad shape, Mr. Sneed. The public sewer is backing into your cellar, and in a case of that kind, the less delay the better." He went into the hall and put on his coat and gloves and took his cane out of the rack. He was 65 years of age that winter. It was a bitter night when even younger men found it a trial to leave the comfort of the fireside. Sneed followed in silence. Indeed, his tongue was shame-bound. For a moment he knew not what to say. "I'm much obliged to you," he stammered, as they went out into the cold wind. "I don't care what it costs, either." The Judge stopped and turned toward him. "Look here," he said, "money does not enter into this proceeding, or any motive but the will to help a neighbor. In such a matter, overtime doesn't count." They walked in silence for the corner. There Sneed pressed the Judge's hand and tried to say something, but his voice failed him. "Have the boys at my office at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I want to talk to them," said the kindly old Judge as he strode away in the darkness. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5 of The Prodigal Village, A Christmas Tale, by Irving Bacheller. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5, in which J. Patterson Bing buys a necklace of pearls. Meanwhile, the Bings had been having a busy winter in New York. J. Patterson Bing had been elected to the board of a large bank in Wall Street. His fortune had more than doubled in the last 2 years, and he was now a considerable factor in finance. Mrs. Bing had been studying current events and French and the English accent and other social graces every morning with the best tutors as she reclined comfortably in her bedchamber while Phyllis went to sundry shops. Mrs. Crooker had once said, "Mamie Bing has a passion for self-improvement." It was mainly, if not quite, true. Phyllis had been beating the bush with her mother at teas and dinners and dances and theaters and country house parties in and about the city. The speedometer on the limousine had doubled its mileage since they came to town. They were, it would seem, a tireless pair of hunters. Phyllis's portrait had appeared in the Sunday papers. It showed a face and form of unusual beauty. The supple grace and classic outlines of the latter were touchingly displayed at the dances in many a handsome ballroom. At last they had found a promising and most eligible candidate in Roger Delane, a handsome, stalwart youth, a year out of college. His father was a well-known and highly successful merchant of an old family which for generations had "belonged." That is to say, it had been a part of the aristocracy of Fifth Avenue. There could be no doubt of this great luck of theirs, better indeed than Mrs. Bing had dared to hope for, the young man having seriously confided his intentions to J. Patterson. But there was one shadow on the glowing prospect. Phyllis had suddenly taken a bad turn. She moped, as her mother put it. She was listless and unhappy. She had lost her interest in the chase, so to speak. She had little heart for teas and dances and dinner parties. One day her mother returned from a luncheon and found her weeping. Mrs. Bing went at once to the telephone and called for the stomach specialist. He came and made a brief examination and said it was all due to rich food and late hours. He left some medicine, advised a day or two of rest in bed, charged $100, and went away. They tried the remedies, but Phyllis showed no improvement. The young man sent American Beauty roses and a graceful note of regret to her room. "You ought to be very happy," said her mother. "He is a dear." "I know it," Phyllis answered. "He's just the most adorable creature I ever saw in my life." "For goodness sake, what is the matter of you? Why don't you brace up?" Mrs. Bing asked with a note of impatience in her tone. "You act like a dead fish." Phyllis, who had been lying on the couch, rose to a sitting posture and flung one of the cushions at her mother, and rather swiftly. "How can I brace up?" she asked with indignation in her eyes. "Don't you dare to scold me." There was a breath of silence in which the two looked into each other's eyes. Many thoughts came flashing into the mind of Mrs. Bing. Why had the girl spoken the word "you" so bitterly? Little echoes of old history began to fill the silence. She arose and picked up the cushion and threw it on the sofa. "What a temper!" she exclaimed. "Young lady, you don't seem to know that these days are very precious for you. They will not come again." Then, in the old fashion of women who have suddenly come out of a moment of affectionate anger, they fell to weeping in each other's arms. The storm was over when they heard the feet of J. Patterson Bing in the hall. Phyllis fled into the bathroom. "Hello," said Mr. Bing as he entered the door. "I've found out what's the matter with Phyllis. It's nerves. I met the great specialist, John Hamilton Gibbs, at luncheon today. I described the symptoms. He said it's undoubtedly nerves. He has any number of cases just like this one. Rest, fresh air, and a careful diet are all that's needed. He says that if he can have her for 2 weeks, he'll guarantee a cure. I've agreed to have you take her to his sanitarium in the Catskills tomorrow. He has saddle horses, sleeping balconies, toboggan rides, snowshoe and skating parties, and all that." "I think it will be great," said Phyllis, who suddenly emerged from her hiding place and embraced her father. "I love it. I'm sick of this old town. I'm sure it's just what I need." "I couldn't go tomorrow," said Mrs. Bing. "I simply must go to Mrs. Delane's luncheon." "Then I'll ask Harriet to go up with her," said J. Patterson. Harriet, who lived in a flat on the Upper West Side, was Mr. Bing's sister. Phyllis went to bed dinnerless with a headache. Mr. and Mrs. Bing sat for a long time over their coffee and cigarettes. "It's something too dreadful that Phyllis should be getting sick just at the wrong time," said the madame. "She has always been well. I can't understand it." "She's had a rather strenuous time here," said J. Patterson. "But she seemed to enjoy it until the right man came along, the very man I hoped would like her. Then suddenly she throws up her hands and keels over. It's too devilish for words." Mr. Bing laughed at his wife's exasperation. "To me it's no laughing matter," said she with a serious face. "Perhaps she doesn't like the boy," J. Patterson remarked. Mrs. Bing leaned toward him and whispered, "She adores him." She held her attitude and looked searchingly into her husband's face. "Well, you can't say I did it," he answered. "The modern girl is a rather delicate piece of machinery. I think she'll be all right in a week or two. Come, it's time we went to the theater if we're going." Nothing more was said of the matter. Next morning, immediately after breakfast, Aunt Harriet set out with Phyllis in the big limousine for Dr. Gibbs's sanitarium. Phyllis found the remedy she needed in the ceaseless round of outdoor frolic. Her spirit, washed in the glowing air, found refreshment in the sleep that follows weariness and good digestion. Her health improved so visibly that her stay was far prolonged. It was the first week of May when Mrs. Bing drove up to get her. The girl was in perfect condition, it would seem. No rustic maid in all the mountain valleys had lighter feet or clearer eyes or a more honest, ruddy tan in her face due to the touch of the clean wind. She had grown as lithe and strong as a young panther. They were going back to Bingville next day. Martha and Susan had been getting the house ready. Mrs. Bing had been preparing what she fondly hoped would be a lovely surprise for Phyllis. Roger Delane was coming up to spend a quiet week with the Bings, a week of opportunity for the young people with saddle horses and a new steam launch and a Peterborough canoe and all pleasant accessories. Then on the 20th, which was the birthday of Phyllis, there was to be a dinner and a house party and possibly an announcement and a pretty wagging of tongues. Indeed, J. Patterson had already bought the wedding gift, a necklace of pearls, and paid $100,000 for it and put it away in his safe. The necklace had pleased him. He had seen many jewels, but nothing so satisfying, nothing that so well expressed his affection for his daughter. He might never see its like again. So he bought it against the happy day which he hoped was near. He had shown it to his wife and charged her to make no mention of it until the time was ripe, in his way of speaking. Mrs. Bing had promised on her word and honor to respect the confidence of her husband with all righteous intention, but on the very day of their arrival in Bingville, Sophronia (Mrs. Pendleton) Ames called. Sophronia was the oldest and dearest friend that Mamie Bing had in the village. The latter enjoyed her life in New York, but she felt always a thrill at coming back to her big garden and the green trees and the ample spaces of Bingville, and to the ready, sympathetic confidence of Sophronia Ames. She told Sophronia of brilliant scenes in the changing spectacle of metropolitan life, of the wonderful young man and the untimely affliction of Phyllis, now happily past. Then, in a whisper, while Sophronia held up her right hand as a pledge of secrecy, she told of the necklace, of which the lucky girl had no knowledge. Now, Mrs. Ames was one of the best of women. People were wont to speak of her, and rightly, as the salt of the earth. She would do anything possible for a friend. But Mamie Bing had asked too much. Moreover, always it had been understood between them that these half-playful oaths were not to be taken too seriously. Of course, the fish had to be fed, as Judge Crooker had once put it. By the fish he meant that curious under life of the village, the voracious, silent, merciless, cold-blooded thing which fed on the sins and follies of men and women, and which rarely came to the surface to bother anyone. "The fish are very wise," Judge Crooker used to say. "They know the truth about everyone, and it's well that they do. After all, they perform an important office. There's many a man and woman who think they've been fooling the fish, but they've only fooled themselves." And within a day or two the secrets of the Bing family were swimming up and down the stream of the under life of Bingville. Mr. Bing had found a situation in the plant which was new to him. The men were discontented. Their wages were sky high, to quote a phrase of one of the foremen. Still they were not satisfied. Reports of the fabulous earnings of the mill had spread among them. They had begun to think that they were not getting a fair division of the proceeds of their labor. At a meeting of the help, a radical speaker had declared that one of the Bing women wore a noose of pearls on her neck worth $500,000. The men wanted more pay and less work. A committee of their leaders had called at Mr. Bing's office with a demand soon after his arrival. Mr. Bing had said "No" with a bang of his fist on the table. A workers' meeting was to be held a week later to act upon the report of the committee. Meanwhile, another cause of worry had come, or rather returned, to him. Again Phyllis had begun to show symptoms of the old trouble. Mrs. Bing, arriving at dusk from a market trip to Hazelmead with Sophronia Ames, had found Phyllis lying asleep among the cushions on the great couch in the latter's bedroom. She entered the room softly and leaned over the girl and looked into her face, now turned toward the open window and lighted by the fading glow in the western sky and relaxed by sleep. It was a sad face. There were lines and shadows in it which the anxious mother had not seen before, and had she been crying? Very softly the woman sat down at the girl's side. Darkness fell. Black, menacing shadows filled the corners of the room. The spirit of the girl betrayed its trouble in a sorrowful groan as she slept. Roger Delane was coming next day. There was every reason why Phyllis should be happy. Silently Mrs. Bing left the room. She met Martha in the hall. "I shall want no dinner, and Mr. Bing is dining in Hazelmead," she whispered. "Miss Phyllis is asleep. Don't disturb her." Then she sat down in the darkness of her own bedroom alone. End of Chapter 5